Dillian Whyte knocks out Costa Jr. in one round. I like what I saw tonight from Dillian Whyte. But let's just get the obvious out of the way. Yes, Costa Jr. is a journeyman, and he didn't appear to come with any ambition, really. He seemed to have a lot more ambition when he fought Joseph Parker and, to a lesser degree, David Price. So let's be under no illusions about who Dillian Whyte was up against tonight. He was up against a journeyman who really just came to collect a paycheck and lie down. But what I liked from Dillian Whyte was his form and his technique, the way he was delivering his punches, his balance, his jab, and all that kind of stuff. You can watch someone on a heavy bag and you can have a look at their form and whatnot. You can see someone on the mitts, on the pads, and you can look at their form and technique. So essentially that's what it was. It was seeing Dillian Whyte move around against an opponent who threw one or two punches at him and seeing Whyte's form and technique. Now, form and technique can break down under pressure. So we'll see how it holds up. But Dillian Whyte's been in there sparring with the Klitschko's and some of the best heavyweights in the world over the past few years. And now that he's with Jonathan Banks, for those of you who don't know, Dillian Whyte's previous trainer, Chris Oko, was involved in an unfortunate incident where he got hit by a hit and run driver, broke his hip, and he's now unable to train Dillian Whyte for the foreseeable future. So he's hooked up with Jonathan Banks, who he met in the Klitschko camp. And for those of you who don't know, most of you will, Jonathan Banks is Vladimir Klitschko's main trainer these days. So he's now training Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte's going to fly out to the States to go train with Jonathan Banks in the Kronk Gym in Detroit. That should be interesting. Not sure what type of heavyweight sparring they got out there, but Dillian Whyte will be out again on another Eddie Hearn show on September 12th. But like I say, from what I saw in this fight, he was delivering his punches more correctly. He seemed nice and relaxed and fluid. And yes, it's against a journeyman, but I've seen Dillian Whyte against other journeymen and he didn't look this fluid. His punches didn't look this crisp, and he wasn't delivering them as correctly as he was in this fight. So I'm impressed with the improvement in his form and technique. His jab looked sharp, and I think his jab is going to be a key punch in the Anthony Joshua fight. Because even if you go back to the amateur fight they had, and I know people say, oh, it's amateurs, it's all different. One thing that's not different is that Dillian Whyte still has longer arms than Anthony Joshua. Even though he's 2 inches shorter, his arms appear to be significantly longer. And that's something which really stood out in the amateur fight. Is even though you could see Joshua was taller, Dillian Whyte has got these big, big long arms. And when he was banging his jab out, it was catching Joshua constantly in that amateur fight. Now, obviously, Joshua has come on leaps and bounds since then. And it may be more difficult. I'm sure it will be more difficult for Dillian Whyte to land his jab now against Joshua. But Dillian Whyte's jab has improved as well. One thing I'll say about Dillian Whyte's jab, though, is when he throws it, or at least when he threw it in this fight against Costa Jr., he was circling to his left and he was falling slightly off balance. I saw him fall slightly off balance a few times when he would jab and move to the left. That's a problem against Joshua because Joshua has a very good counter right hand and he's going to be looking to land that over Dillian Whyte's jab, especially when he falls off balance to his left. So he's going to have to watch that. Jonathan Banks, I probably ain't going to listen to this video, but I hope they work on that and make sure that he's not walking into Joshua counter right hands. Okay, he's going to need to sort that out and step over rather than stepping, round in a circle with the opponent. Step over, okay, rather than just following him round. If he does that and keeps his balance, it's going to be much better. Or better yet, you don't always need to circle left when you're throwing the left jab. You know, you could throw the left jab, stay static, or move right, take a step right away from your opponent's right hand. Although Joshua has a very good left hook as well. But yeah, I think with the jab, as long as Dillian Whyte keeps a tight defense, particularly in the early going, keep a tight defense and work that long jab particularly to Anthony Joshua's head. Not so much to the body, because as I say, Joshua was very quick over the top with the right hand. So Dillian Whyte does have a good jab to the body. He'll have to test out the range and see how easy it is to touch Joshua at all with the jab early on. And maybe after that, he could start thinking about jabs to the body, but pick them carefully. He won't be able to jab to the body as liberally against Joshua as he did against Costa Jr., because Costa Jr. don't have a fast, straight right hand over the top like Anthony Joshua does. So, yeah, there's that issue there. But I think with that straight, long jab that he's got, with the physical strength and the mentality that Dillian Whyte's got, I still believe that this Joshua Whyte fight has the potential to be one of the most exciting British heavyweight title fights we've seen in a long time, for as long as it lasts. This fight may not last long. Whenever you get two young, hungry, ambitious fighters in there, two guys who can punch, two guys who are naturally aggressive and have bags of killer instinct, which is what you have with Joshua and Whyte, who are both undefeated, who both genuinely don't like each other. This is not like the Coyle Campbell situation. These are two guys who genuinely have beef. Dillian Whyte, on at least 2 occasions, has offered Anthony Joshua out in a street fight. I believe in fact, there's an interview which you should go watch, which is a in-depth, long interview on IFL TV. They just uploaded it today. Kugan Cassius interviewing Dillian Whyte. And Dillian Whyte goes into a lot of things which he hasn't really talked about before, or not talked about in as much detail, to do with the Joshua situation and just other situations in his life and during his boxing career. And in that interview, he talks about the fact that there was one point, I think it was when Dillian Whyte was banned, because he served a 2-year ban for taking an over-the-counter supplement, which he didn't realize was banned. It wasn't steroids or anything like that. It's just an over-the-counter supplement. And unfortunately, it got banned about 2 weeks before he took it. That's just how luck would have it. But anyway, I think it was during the time of Dillian Whyte's ban when him and Joshua got into some type of beef on Twitter or something like that, or maybe it was the stuff that Anthony Joshua supposedly said about Dillian Whyte in some magazine article or radio interview, and Dillian Whyte took exception to it, and I can't remember if he tweeted Anthony Joshua or called him up. I think he said he called him up and said, look, we can meet anywhere in London and we'll fight in a street fight. And he did something similar when he saw Joshua in the Klitschko camp. They were both in the Klitschko camp together and they had to be separated. And this is without cameras or anything like that, so it weren't a publicity stunt. This is real. This beef between them is real. And whenever you get two young guys like that, relatively inexperienced, who've got real beef, both guys can bang, both guys are naturally aggressive, both guys have a bit of a hot head, you're going to get an explosive fight while it lasts. You just are. I'm telling you, this fight is going to be high drama. And I'm liking what I'm seeing with Dillian Whyte working with Jonathan Banks, showing him some technical things. And again, go listen to that interview with Kugan Cassius, because he talks about a lot of things about Klitschko. And I've said this before. This is slightly off topic, but I've said before that Vladimir Klitschko is not only in my opinion anyway, the least likable Klitschko in terms of in the ring, but is also the least likable Klitschko behind the scenes. And Dillian Whyte in this interview admits he never really liked Vladimir Klitschko. He said he liked Vitaly. Vitaly was a cool guy who would sit down with him and chat to all the sparring partners and have a joke with everyone. But Dillian Whyte described him as a bully. He wouldn't really talk to people. He would try and knock his sparring partners out and take advantage of them. And Dillian Whyte talks about the fact that Vladimir would try and rough Dillian up in sparring. And this is something I've heard from a lot of Klitschko sparring partners, Vladimir Klitschko sparring partners, is that he'll try and lean on them, rough them up and get away with all the dirty tactics that he does in his professional fights. But as soon as the sparring partners fight back and try and get rough with him, the trainers stop it and tell the sparring partners don't do that. And a lot of the time they send him home. That's what happened to Sherman Tank Williams. That's something about Vladimir that just really irks me. Like, he does dirty things to fighters, but when they do it back to him, they want to kick the sparring partners out and send them home. So I'm hoping Tyson Fury manages to rough him up. But again, that's a different subject. But Dillian Whyte basically talks about that. He talks about the fact that he tried to rough Vladimir Klitschko up in response to what Vladimir was doing to him, and he nearly got kicked out of the training camp because of that. No wonder he don't like Vlad. Vlad is a bit of a bully behind the scenes, it seems. And but that type of experience, I think, in training camp with Vladimir, where Dillian was trying to take it to Vladimir and all this kind of stuff because he don't want to be bullied by anyone, that kind of stuff is invaluable, I think. That kind of stuff is going to serve Dillian Whyte very, very well, because if he can go in there and try and put it on Vladimir Klitschko, who's the best in the world, then why can't he go in there and try and put it on Anthony Joshua? And according to Dillian Whyte, and I've got no reason to doubt him, I haven't seen any contradictory information. According to Dillian Whyte, he was never down or cut or busted up or anything whenever he sparred Vladimir Klitschko. And that's a hard thing to do, believe you me, because Klitschko knocks plenty of guys out in sparring. So I think that's going to be important experience. He knows he can hang tough if he has to, and he may well have to hang tough against Anthony Joshua, particularly in the early going, because Joshua is faster. He is probably he seems to be better coordinated, more athletic, etc. People have talked about Dillian Whyte's physique, and you would like to see him a bit more trim than he is now, maybe lose a few more pounds. But the most important thing is how well is he moving at whatever weight he's at. Some guys are not particularly body beautiful, but they move quickly. Someone, for example, whose weight I've been very concerned by is Tyson Fury. Because when Tyson Fury is heavier, it's very noticeable to me that he's slower. His reflexes are slower. His hand speed is slower. His punches just look sloppy to me. But when he's lighter, he looks so much sharper. At the weight that Dillian Whyte was at tonight against Costa Jr., he still looked pretty sharp. He didn't look sluggish to me at all. In fact, that was as sharp as I've seen him for quite a few fights. So, yeah, he could do maybe with trimming down a little bit. But as he is at the moment, I think he's still pretty sharp. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this fight. It'll be interesting to see what opponent they've got for Dillian Whyte on September 12th. It's going to be down to Eddie Hearn to sort all that out. Dillian Whyte, I know Dillian Whyte was disappointed that Costa Jr. didn't put up more resistance tonight. And he's going to be hoping that Eddie Hearn sorts him out with someone that can take him a few rounds, because he knows he's got this tough fight against Joshua, and he knows it's a tough fight. And as far as the people saying, because there's a lot of people saying that Joshua is just going to blow Dillian Whyte out, and I guess we'll find out. But a lot of people are saying that Dillian Whyte shouldn't be taking the Joshua fight. And again, in that AFL TV interview, which I really recommend, I'll put a link to it below actually, he explains why he's taking the Joshua fight. He don't have to take it, but if you understand Dillian Whyte's mentality, then you'll understand why he's taking the fight. Dillian Whyte is a fighter. This guy comes from a fighting background. His dad and his uncle were bare knuckle fighters in Jamaica. This guy's been fighting from young. He has an old school mentality. This is a guy who had hardly any amateur experience at all. But yet he was sparring David Haye and trying to go at David Haye. He was sparring people like both Klitschko's, Vitaly and Vladimir. He was sparring Derek Chisora. He was sparring David Price. He's been sparring all of these top pros while he hardly had any amateur experience. And he's been going for it in sparring against these guys. Also sparred Tyson Fury. So he has the mentality of someone who's not afraid. He don't care about your reputation. If he's been in there sparring David Haye when he hadn't even had any pro fights, and sparring people like Tyson Fury and Klitschko when he's only had a handful of pro fights multiple times, then he's not going to be at all intimidated by Anthony Joshua, a guy who, yes, he beat him a long time ago, but he did already beat him. So you have to understand the mentality of Dillian Whyte. This is a fearless kind of character. And when you understand that, then you know why he's taking the Anthony Joshua fight. He's not afraid at all. Right? This is a guy who, the first time he used to do kickboxing as an amateur. The first time he stepped in a kickboxing gym, he was getting battered for a long time. Every time he went back to kickboxing, he was getting battered. But he kept going. It didn't deter him. And the same thing happened in boxing. When he first started boxing, he was getting beaten up in sparring in the gym on a regular basis. And he admits that himself, but he kept on going, but it didn't discourage him. That's the kind of character he is. And then obviously he's done that with Klitschko and Hay and all these other people. He's not discouraged and he's not afraid. And that's why he's taking a Joshua fight. And he says, look, I just want to be remembered. In this interview, he says, I just want to be remembered as someone who was willing to fight anyone. And he talks about some of the most popular British heavyweight champions over the years. People like Frank Bruno, and actually Frank Bruno was never British heavyweight champion, but he talks about Henry Cooper and Joe Bogner and all these British heavyweight champions, Lennox Lewis and all these other guys down the years. And he wants to be remembered in that type of light as someone who gave the fans great fights and was willing to fight anyone and weren't afraid. So Dillian Whyte is well aware of his own mortality, people. I'm sure in his head he don't think he's going to retire undefeated, but he's got that kind of mentality. He's not afraid to let his old go, and he loves a fight. And Anthony Joshua is seen as the heir apparent to Klitschko by a lot of people. So if Dillian Whyte goes in there and even does well against Joshua, but loses, that's going to raise Dillian Whyte's stock, particularly if Joshua goes on to achieve great things. And if he wins, then he literally takes Anthony Joshua's place. So as far as Dillian Whyte is concerned, this is a no-lose situation in some ways for Dillian Whyte, because if he loses and Joshua goes on to be special, that's not going to really, as long as he puts on a decent enough performance, that's not going to really hurt his credibility that much. And if he wins, then the world's his oyster. If he didn't fight Anthony Joshua, what would he do right now? You get what I'm saying? It would take a long time. He doesn't really have the kind of backing that Anthony Joshua has with Sky and Eddie Hearn and all that kind of stuff. And this build-up with Joshua has been, I'm talking about the way they've built Joshua up as a product. It's been, 2 years that they've had to build him up. And that was on the back of a gold medal. So to try and get, let's say Dillian Whyte signed with Matchroom and didn't take the Joshua fight, to try and get to the level where Joshua was at in terms of publicity and, public recognition, it would take a long time to do it with him. The only reason people are even talking about Dillian Whyte now, the general public, is because of the Joshua fight. You see? So to him, this is a worthwhile risk, because he'd still be in obscurity if it wasn't for taking the Joshua fight. So it is what it is. Anyway, this video is a little bit longer than I thought. It's obviously way longer than the actual fight itself, but I just felt there was quite a few things to talk about in terms of Dillian Whyte and this Joshua fight and what have you. But as I say, go check out the IFL TV interview and let me know what you felt about Dillian Whyte's performance. Did you see the improvements that I saw in terms of his technique and his form on the Jonathan Banks? And I'll be interested to see who's going to fight on September 12th. There was talk about Jason Gavin. I think Jason Gavin piped up on Twitter and was saying something to Eddie Hearn like he'd like to fight Dillian Whyte on September 12th. And Dillian Whyte wasn't happy about that. He wants a tougher opponent. He says he would like to fight someone tall. So, yeah. Drop your comments below. Let me know how you feel about everything I talked about in this video. It's Hatman, I'm out.